Red beans and rice, chili, endless varieties of soup, and meringue? Yes, beans. These surprisingly healthy legumes need some careful handling to bring out their full potential. Certain canned items, like fruit and syrup, are ready to eat, but beans minimally require 2 steps: rinsing and draining. According to Bush's Best spokesperson, T.C. Moore, it consists of water and salt, which cause the legumes to release starches over time. While you shouldn't toss it all away, it's advisable to separate it. They become coated in the salted, starchy liquid when they're canned, so to avoid undesirable flavors or textures from the residue, you should always rinse canned beans. The Test Kitchen folks at Better Homes and Gardens point out that rinsing also helps eliminate any metallic flavors they might have acquired from the can. It's also worth noting that the primary nutritional downfall of canned beans is their sodium content. However, according to the results of a 2011 study published by the Journal of Culinary Science and Technology, there is a notable decrease in sodium content before and after rinsing them. As an added bonus, nutritionists note that passing canned beans through water can lower the compounds that create digestive discomfort and gas. Nevertheless, depending on the dish you're making, you might not want excess water either. Be sure to shake the beans off in a colander and leave them to drain for a few minutes following a rinse. While a good rinse is beneficial for several reasons, you don't have to dump the liquid from canned beans into your sink. As it turns out, it offers many interesting culinary benefits. Since it consists of salt, water, and bean starch, it can work as both a flavoring and thickening agent in soups and stews. Meanwhile, canned chickpea liquid, aka aquafaba, has become a superstar ingredient in vegan baking. Not only does it act as a suitable binder thanks to its high starch content, but it also makes an admirable egg or egg white substitute, as Bob's Red Mill explains. The site lists the appropriate conversions. Use 1 tablespoon to mimic an egg yolk, 2 tablespoons for an egg white, and 3 for a whole egg. Unlike swaps using flax or chia seeds, aquafaba can hold air as it's whipped, turning into foam and ultimately rising, much like a meringue. Don't think this trick should be limited to vegan baking either. Aquafaba can save your spontaneous baked creation when you realize you've run out of eggs. And rest assured, your chickpea liquid treats won't divulge their secret. Canned food is especially convenient thanks to its durability. However, every now and then, the rigid aluminum exterior of the can is damaged, be it through the distribution and shipping process or when you accidentally drop it. While the source of the dent in the latter case is evident, buying a compromised can is a bit of a riskier scenario.
Could be lunch meat, could be peaches, who knows?
If we're only talking about a minor indentation, your beans should be fine. However, the U.S. Department of Agriculture reports that more pronounced dents with notably sharp edges are potentially unsafe. In particular, when the seam of the can is damaged, bacteria have a direct route of entry. To determine whether the airtight seal has been affected, press down on the lid to see if there is a popping sound. To alleviate any hesitations about the state of the insides, just open the can and examine the contents. Any hissing, spraying, or foul odor signifies that you should toss it out. Meanwhile, some cans show signs of bloating, with or without dents. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration notes that this characteristic can be due to microorganism activity or spoilage. If you're ever in doubt, don't take a chance. Substituting dried beans with canned in a recipe is a good trick to reduce prep time and get dinner on the table faster. However, you risk ending up with less than stellar results if you don't modify recipes to compensate. For starters, even if you rinse your can of legumes, it will still contain notably more sodium. Canned beans absorb some of the salted water they are stored in, whereas dried ones first soak in whatever you cook them in. If you're making an aromatic broth, it won't enhance your canned beans quite as much as the alternative. While your broth or stew will still be packed with flavor, the legumes will retain a fairly one-dimensional taste, unless they simmer for at least half an hour. Don't push it on the duration though, or the structural integrity of the beans will begin to deteriorate. Conversely, given their dry and hard characteristics, dried legumes maintain far more bite as they cook. Be sure to adjust the cooking time if you're following a recipe meant for the latter. Naturally, 1 cup of plump canned beans isn't equivalent to the same volume dried. The correct ratio varies depending on the type of legume, but typically 1 cup of dehydrated beans can equal 2.25 to 3 cups of the canned type. Meanwhile, Cooks Illustrated makes the conversion from 1 pound of dried beans to 58 ounces of canned ones, which can be 3 to 4 cans. Some recipes are more forgiving and might just result in a dish with less bulk, since dehydrated beans just about double in size and weight as they cook. You can be pretty lenient with a hearty stew, but this shouldn't be the case if you're aiming for a specific consistency. You can bet that you'll need to add more liquid to your food processor if you accidentally double the quantity of chickpeas in your hummus recipe. No matter what you're preparing, be sure to double-check the units of measurement to avoid having to perform significant adjustments. You might think that a recipe written for dried beans only requires a few modifications in quantity and cooking time, but it goes beyond that. As mentioned, canned beans usually sit in a brine solution of salt, water, and their own starch. Granted, this may vary depending on whether you are working with a reduced sodium canned product. Still, that's a far cry from dehydrated beans, which require plenty of water and salt before you even start seasoning them, according to your desired flavor profile. To distinguish your meal from basic legumes in a can, simmering them with herbs and spices infuses rich flavors and does wonders to enhance their quality. Just because you don't have time to begin with dried beans from scratch, it doesn't mean you have to settle for less flavor. Olive oil is guaranteed to make plain legumes taste better, and spices like garlic powder, chili flakes, thyme, rosemary, oregano, cumin, coriander, and paprika are all great starting points for your culinary experimentation. Sometimes you only have time to toss a can of rinsed chickpeas in with some other veggies, then call it a day. And while that's partly why we love the efficiency of canned beans, they also have far more potential. Whipping up a 3-bean chili recipe or blitzing up a can of chickpeas for homemade hummus are obvious options, but there's so much more to be done.
But combine one flavor with another, and something new was created.
Vegetarian bean burgers are a delicious version of a meat-based dish. If avocados aren't in season, or you're over the green toast phenomenon, cannellini beans on toast are the creamy alternative you didn't realize you needed in your life. For a textural opposite, roasted chickpeas will surely be your new favorite crunchy snack, and you can easily modify the recipe based on your desired flavor profile. Your creations don't have to remain on the savory spectrum of flavors either. Canned chickpeas, white beans, or black beans make excellent ingredients in several baked treats like brownies or blondies. Much like you have to be vigilant about whether your recipe calls for 2 cups of dried versus canned beans, you'll also have to take note of overall cooking times. While dried beans can easily simmer for a couple of hours, you'll end up with a mushy mess if you try the same with the canned version. Because they're meant to be ready to use, canned beans are already cooked. Nonetheless, chances are you might want to season the legumes or incorporate them into a preparation that requires cooking. Southern Living also notes that some types of beans, such as black, kidney, and cannellini, require a bit more liquid as you cook them, or else they may become too dry. Use this as an excuse to pack in more flavor by simmering them in a broth or water seasoned with aromatics. After half an hour at low heat, they should be perfectly creamy and ready to eat. Much longer, and you're veering into unidentified pulp territory. Although canned foods last for years, according to the USDA, and maybe even indefinitely, once the packaging is compromised, the shelf life quickly drops. You're looking at 3 to 4 days once a can of beans is opened, much like any other perishable food item. As it happens, the handy vessel they've been stored in up until you eat them is not ideal for leftovers. While the USDA assures consumers that these cans are not unsafe, they can impart metallic flavors to the food. In particular, those with a high acid content, tomatoes and pineapple, for instance, are more likely to run this risk due to possible corrosive activity. For best results, rinse and drain the entire can of beans, and store whatever you don't use in an airtight glass or plastic container in your refrigerator. Since the purpose of these boxes is food storage, you can rest assured that they're most suited to the task. Depending on your bean consumption, it's fair that you might not want to eat an entire can in each sitting. And while you can incorporate them into recipes for your weekly meal prep, variety is the spice of life. Even though there are times when we are happy to dig into a bowl of chili on repeat, in other instances, we want new and exciting meals regularly. In these cases, your best bet is to freeze leftover beans, since you won't be getting much out of them past 3 days. However, much like when you're storing them in the refrigerator, how you store them is important. According to Ontario bean growers, start by rinsing and draining the legumes in a colander. Then pat them dry and transfer them to an airtight container or a sealed plastic bag. Bush's Best suggests covering the beans with water if you store them in a container, but it isn't necessary. You can freeze them for no longer than 1 to 2 months to maintain optimal quality. Once you're ready for more, let them thaw, drain off the excess water, and use the legumes as you would straight out of the can. Instinctively, you might jump to the conclusion that canned beans don't have the same nutritional benefits as dehydrated ones, given their convenient, ready-to-eat nature. After all, there's something about the process of opening a metal can that feels unnatural compared to legumes in a raw and dried state. Nonetheless, the difference isn't as large as you might imagine. Plus, anything that gets you eating healthy food is worth consuming.
You're not just knocking them out with great taste, you're giving them fantastic nutrition.
Canned or dried beans contain notable amounts of protein, fiber, vitamins, and minerals. The canning process also helps transform the fiber into a more digestible form, eliminating physical discomfort later on. If you're trying to cut down on sodium, you're in luck. As mentioned before, you can rinse beans to decrease the salt content of canned beans. Alternatively, you can buy reduced sodium versions. Perhaps up until now, you've only considered canned beans sold at the grocery store. However, much like canning pickles and preserves, the same resourcefulness can be employed to make your own canned beans. Since you're using dried beans to begin with, you'll even eliminate any issues related to salt content or worries about the material used in standard cans. Before the idea intimidates you, know that canning requires following basic yet important directions. You'll need a pressure canner and clean glass jars. But beyond that, it's really just a matter of performing each step with intention. Depending on the type and quantity of beans, as well as the size of your pressure canner, the National Center for Home Food Preservation notes that the duration of cooking will vary. Starting with dried beans, soak them for several hours before boiling them to cook. Transfer the boiled beans and hot water into sterilized jars, ensuring that everything remains submerged. If you want to add a pinch of salt or any other seasoning, now's the time. Place the lids over the jars and pop them into the pressure canner to seal. Follow the instructions for your specific appliance for the best and safest results. Home canned beans? How cool is that?
Cool beans.
Cool beans.